Finally, we can talk about Assassin's Creed Shadows. The embargo is lifted and we are able to discuss everything we know about the game and show you a ton of new gameplay along with our impressions, starting with the main pillars of the game, including our dual protagonists and how different they feel, the new and revised stealth approach which makes use of many other systems in the game, the parkour which definitely surprised me, the combat system and all its details including weapon types and enemy types, and finally a look at the new exploration systems with the caveat at the end. So no time to waste, I am so happy we can share all the information with you, so without further ado, let's dive into all the Assassin's Creed Shadows news. So first of all, in today's video we won't be able to discuss everything that we have found and seen about Assassin's Creed Shadows in the last week or so, because it is definitely too much and we can't fit it in one single video. As you might have heard, last week we were invited to the Ubisoft Quebec studio, so thanks to all of the teams involved for the opportunity, and I got to play around 6 hours of the game, which included roughly an hour and a half dedicated to the prologue of the game, which we couldn't capture but we can roughly discuss, around 3.5 hours dedicated to a section of the open world of the game set in the Harima region that also included a main mission with one of the main targets, and an hour or so dedicated to test the hideout, which is definitely an evolution from the settlement system in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and that we're going to discuss in a later video. But of course we did more than that. We got to talk to the developers, witness several presentations within the studio, and even got to discuss the Animus Hub, the new platform from which players will be able to launch the new games including Shadows, and some of the old ones, as we'll discuss again in another dedicated video. So let's start with our two main characters. At the start of the game, Naoe and Yasuke will be on two opposing sides, as already hinted at by the original CGI trailer, because of the second Tensho-Iga war that saw the troops of Oda Nobunaga invading and trying to pacify the Iga region in 1581. Having Naoe and Yasuke on two opposing sides at the start is quite useful gameplay wise too, as following both of their stories individually, the player can start to get acquainted with their playstyles too. Naoe and Yasuke play and feel so very different from each other, and it's not just a marketing claim. They truly need to be mastered in their own ways, because each of them has their own strong points and weaknesses. Naoe is obviously the assassin or shinobi character. She is nimble and agile, and her running speed is so very fast compared to the other characters from past games that in the urban areas it might be even more useful to run on the ground as her than to go on the usual slowed down horse mount. Her agility can truly be seen with parkour as well, which finally does feel faster and more agile in the most basic movements of climbing and controlled descent, in other on-the-ground tactics such as the dodging mechanic that can really be part of the movement flow, and of course also in combat. Even in combat she is nimble and agile, meaning you'll often need to attack and dodge to avoid being hit, because once you're hit, you're already in danger, and that's where her obvious weakness lies. But that's also where Yasuke comes into play. Yasuke is the samurai, he's the tank, he's mostly slow but super powerful, and thus feels and plays very different from Naoe. What he lacks in agility and speed, and also parkour capability, if not for some very basic elements, he compensates with more resistance, armor, and damage dealt. This translates to easier combat sessions, more blows that you can take as him, and even the array of weapons that he can use is more often than not oriented towards high damage and low speed. In general, I have to be honest, there have been a few occasions where I found myself stuck because a mission objective caused me to end fighting multiple enemies as Naoe, and at least at first it was really tough, especially because at times the game throws at you some over-leveled foes and it can get quite messy while playing as her, but then, as you can switch between the characters almost at any point of the game, I did try the same section with Yasuke and it was quite feasible, and of course the same happened vice versa when the game told me to infiltrate a castle or to stealth my way through some enemies, so you could really say that the two characters are best suited for specific actions, specific sections of the game, and it really depends on the player to choose who they think is best for every situation, or if they want to raise their challenge to actually go the opposite way. For example, in one of the presentations by game director Charles Benoit and associate game director Simon Lemay-Comtois, we could see an infiltration using Yasuke during winter in the Nijo castle in Kyoto, which of course was much tougher but still feasible if you set your weapons, armor and especially perks right. So like I said, both characters complement each other and are useful when you're stuck with one of them, but that's not to say necessarily that the world is built for the both of them in the same way, or that it feels designed to be tackled or explored by them equally. Exploration in particular seems to be pretty one-sided, as we'll see later. But before we get into that, let's discuss stealth, cause honestly this is one of the systems I was looking forward to the most, but it also surprised me quite a lot. Even in here, what was mentioned in the lead up for the game was definitely not only marketing. Stealth has been properly revamped and it does make use of the other systems of the game. The most notable one is of course the lighting system, where you can truly use a darkened location as a hiding spot, and I think this is the system that will get me and possibly other longtime fans a bit more time to get used to, because the moment I started my stealth sessions in the build, I instinctively followed my standard stealth approach in the Assassin's Creed games. As usual, I approached by going to a vantage point, I scouted the enemies, this time using the observation feature to tag them and eagle vision to spot them. So my tip here is to always use observe while eagle vision is on during your stealth sessions, so you can always tag enemies behind walls. So like I said, my personal approach: vantage point, scout the enemies, air assassinate some, use the provided tools if needed, then hide in stalking zones like bushes or even low grass, and in that regard the new prone stance can do wonders to reduce or cancel detection. But like I said, it did take me quite a while to remember that I can also use the dark to my advantage, that I can also just extinguish or break lights to generate a new hiding spot out in the open. And man, once you remember that, once you keep track of that, it changes a lot. It really changes your strategy as to how to approach forts and their subsections. And if you do get spotted, there are plenty of ways to hide to restart the stealth loop, while the last known position mechanic will make a comeback to show us where enemies are going to look for us. Another system you can use to your advantage for stealth in shadows is the weather system, as in heavy rain or snow and high winds can actually reduce your detection meter to represent that guards can't hear your steps as much as they would in a silent environment. So players can use that to their advantage, maybe even take a few more risks, but always keeping in mind the detection meter placed at the top of the screen. Of course, Naoe has also a set of stealth tools at her disposal to help her in her infiltration endeavors, that is the kunai knives, the smoke bombs, the shinobi bells and the shuriken, and I have to say, while it took me a while to learn how to hide in the shadows, I felt quite comfortable with all of these tools pretty soon. The kunai are your classic assassin knives. They're useful to thin out your enemies so you can sneak around more easily. The smoke bombs are again a classic tool to escape a tough situation or to stop some of your enemies and assassinate them, though remember, these don't work on some stronger enemy types such as the samurai. Then we have the shinobi bells, which you can use to draw the enemy's attention to a specific location, while you can use the whistle to draw their attention towards you. And finally, the shuriken that can stun enemies but can also break light sources and cause additional distractions with the environment. Each of these tools can allow you to continue undetected in your stealth process or can get you out of a complicated situation, and there's also a quick throw option connected to them, though it's currently a little complicated to activate. You have to select the tools wheel first before activating the quick throw, so it's not that quick of a quick throw. And also I wasn't able to find a way to instantly throw some of those tools on the ground while we're standing, like the smoke bombs. I necessarily had to aim them, which caused me to waste some precious time. Stealth also goes hand in hand with the assassinations, and in this game, at least at first, players will need to be very aware of the actual noise that Naoe makes when she performs the deed, cause that also will be taken into account by the nearby guards, and it will then be up to the player to reduce it through the skill trees and progression. The game will feature different types of assassinations, such as the classic ones like the running and air assassinations, including air assassinations while swinging from the grappling hook, the chance to grab enemies and take them towards stalking zones and assassinate them there, the cover assassinations, the ledge assassinations, the assassinations from hiding spots such as haystacks and wells, but also the more special moves like assassinations through the shoji doors, the assassinations from these casket-like boxes, which are quite cool, the double assassinations by using the tanto, which felt quite amazing in all their variations, the rush assassination from a distance using the kusuregama, the possibility to assassinate while in combat through the hidden hand skill, and maybe even more. As you might have seen from the official article on stealth, assassinating is not always guaranteed in the game unless you toggle that from the options, and it can also end up with only causing damage or being denied the assassination altogether. This will really depend on the progression side of it, with the player needing to invest in skills such as the reinforced blade skill that allows to use the hidden blade on large enemies, or the hand of the creed skill, which basically removes the denied assassination when enemies see Naoe coming. But players will also have to invest in engravings and perks that increase their assassination damage, and honestly, based on the loadout of the build I played in, most of the time I did find enemies that were at my level and could be easily assassinated, and if they weren't, a nice kunai would make them more suitable for the assassination anyway. But again, like I said, if you're not really interested in all of that, you can just toggle in the guaranteed assassination and you're set. One drawback that I feel to be quite relevant is that while having a stealth session at night feels amazing because the dark can really be your friend, if you're not done by daytime and the sun rises, your visibility meter will rise as well anywhere you are, meaning it would be much tougher to do it because you're likely to be immediately spotted if you are outdoors, and quite sadly there isn't a mechanic to fast forward time to nighttime, so this might be an issue for players, especially if they are forced in such a situation by a story mission that will cause them either to wait for the dark to come back or to go and do something else. Then again, like I said earlier, if a stealth session doesn't work or it's too tough, try and go in as Yasuke. Doing it the high profile way might prove to be the right call at times. Stealth can also be somewhat performed by Yasuke with various degrees of success. While performing stealth, he gets to be even slower, and because of his size, he sticks out more, making him quite detectable, even by animals, but the detection systems still apply to him, so you can still try hiding in bushes, go prone, climb small walls to gain a vantage point, and also, because he doesn't have any stealth tools, you can use his ranged weapons like his Yumi bow, which is quite silent, or his stepper rifle, which is definitely not silent. Yasuke can also perform assassinations, but they're called brutal assassinations, both because they are quite graphic, but also because Yasuke is very noisy with them, and his honor of samurai will cause him to scream and to face his enemy full front. So it's an assassination, but really it's a lead-in to a combat sequence. So these are just my thoughts on stealth based on what I saw and found, because there are other stealth related elements that are going to be interesting to face, like the nightingale floors, which are going to produce sounds if you're not stealthy enough, or if you're Yasuke, the enemies falling asleep that cannot see you but might hear you, the chance to use falling stalactites in winter against enemies, or the chance to try and go prone in snow or underwater in ponds, and so much more that I'm sure was purposefully not part of the build to keep some surprises. Something else that instead isn't going to be part of the game, based on what we tested, is social stealth, which once again will skip an Assassin's Creed game after coming back with Mirage, though honestly, the villages and cities I did see in the build didn't have as much NPCs or groups of NPC to allow to think that social stealth could even be an option. Parkour, shockingly, is another element that surprised me in a positive way, and that's starting from its basic movements of parkour up and down. Climbing and descending finally feel a little faster, less heavy, and a little snappier, and that allows you to get at the top of the buildings or down to the ground in a much more satisfying way. As the official article mentions, the dodge button has been merged with the parkour down button, and this means that based on how Naoe is placed close to a ledge and based on the direction or absence thereof input by the player, she is going to perform different types of descent, which is going to be quite interesting strategy-wise, especially during infiltrations. While I don't really enjoy the emphasis on this, Naoe is also truly the fastest assassin of the franchise in that her running speed is almost at the brink of feeling less realistic. Like I said, she seems to be at least as fast as horse mounts within towns, but it's still enjoyable, and this speed, coupled with the dodge mechanics, can allow you to vault over small items or piles of items and thus test some kind of urban or naturalistic parkour paths, especially if you can mix that with the grappling hook that's been introduced with Shadows. Now, we have tested the grappling hook in our build. It's an interesting and useful tool that Naoe can use under pretty much any kind of ledge to use its ascent mode and reach it, or in its swing mode to cover wide gaps, with the addition that you can also perform an air assassination while you're swinging, and you can also switch between the two modes while you're using the grappling hook, though I have to say, in the few hours we tested the game, we didn't find a lot of instances where we could use the swing mode, and I ended up using the grappling hook way more to ascend quickly to the roofs. So it feels like a faster, more fluid and more technical parkour after a number of years, but sadly it's still lacking in other ways. Some are natural and historical, as in the design of the cities and villages, for what I've seen, is really not oriented towards urban parkour, and not necessarily for lack of palaces, but at least in the builds we tested we didn't find many parkour paths to enjoy running through, and also the game is lacking some of the fan favorite moves and ingredients to keep the flow going that Mirage had brought back, like the side ejects, though back ejects are in the game, and the corner swings, and there have been a few occasions where I wanted to jump in a direction and now I went towards another one, so again, it's not perfect, but honestly, maybe this is the first time since Syndicate or Origins where I felt like the parkour has improved in terms of feeling compared to its predecessors, so kudos to the team in this regard. Another focus of the game where I think the team really did a good job is combat, and most importantly, it really is intuitive right at the start, thanks to the various tutorials in the prologue, and also because in terms of button mapping, it's not so far from its predecessors. As in the previous games, you'll be able to do light and heavy attacks with your preferred weapon, and the so-called posture attacks, which are charge light and charge heavy attacks that you can perform by holding the concerned button in order to cause more damage, but also to break an enemy's stance or to break their armors, indicated by a yellow line over their life bar. The game has also introduced the vulnerable state for enemies, where you can see an orange glow over them and cause more damage to them, and this state can be caused with a perfect parry or a perfect dodge, or at times also by parrying all the flurry attacks by the enemies, which are brief sections of hits that can be aimed at our characters that are indicated by a blue glint, which differentiates them from the red glint that identifies the unstoppable attacks that, as the name says, can be avoided only through dodges, sort of, as we'll see. Even in combat, there are radical and small differences between Naoe and Yasuke, whom the system is obviously more focused on. For example, Yasuke will be able to sustain more hits and to take on more enemies, also thanks to his armor, while Naoe will be better at one-to-one combat, but as mentioned earlier, he'll get increasingly tougher with more enemies around her. Yasuke's blows are also heavier than Naoe's, his parries cause enemies to bounce back, allowing for his counterattacks, whereas Naoe's cause her to move sideways to her enemies. Yasuke's dodge just implies a side step, while Naoe's is a full roll and can be used multiple times. Moreover, through the link attack ability, Yasuke can shift from his primary weapon to his secondary weapon mid-combo, which Naoe cannot do. He can block incoming arrows and kunai, and with the proper skills or perks unlocked, he can indeed also parry or at least resist the unstoppable attacks. So yes, our main characters have different skills and abilities, as we'll see in another video when discussing progression, but of course Naoe's combat ones will again be focused on agility and on a flurry of low damage hits, while Yasuke's active abilities on average will be heavy hitters. Now let's talk about the weapons in the game. Our main characters will have a total of 8 weapon types, 9 if we count the hidden blade and 10 if we consider the kunais, which are the only ranged damage dealing weapon for Naoe. Now we have a katana for standard short range combat, through which she'll be able to assassinate through the shoji doors, a kusarigama, that is her changed sight weapon that can deal damage from a distance, sometimes stopping enemies in their attacks, and allowing for assassinations from a distance through the rush assassinate skill, then the tanto short blade that allows for close quarter combat along with the hidden blade, marking the return of hidden blade combat, and also allows for the double assassinations in the game, and like we said, the hidden blade and the kunais. Yasuke on his side will have more weapon types than Naoe, 5 to be exact. The first one is the long katana, a katana that is more powerful than Naoe's obviously, but is still the fastest weapon in Yasuke's arsenal. The second is the naginata, the classic spear/blade used by the samurai class of feudal Japan, a weapon that can hit multiple enemies around Yasuke and thus can save you when you're surrounded, but is slow and still not as slow as the kanabo, that is the spiked or studded two-handed war club once again traditionally used by the samurai in feudal Japan, that is the epitome of low speed by high damage. Then Yasuke has 2 ranged weapon types, something that Naoe doesn't have access to. The first one is the Yumi bow or long bow. It's a quite powerful bow that basically works like most bows in the recent Assassin's Creed games, but for which Yasuke really takes the extra second before being able to shoot his arrows. Within the build, the bow also provided 3 different types of arrows that could be acquired or refilled at vendors. The standard arrows, the serrated arrows which build up the bleed affliction status in enemies, and the silent arrows which make little sound and will catch enemies off guard, which will be quite useful in case we want to try a stealth approach with Yasuke. The build also seemed to hint at a 4th arrow type being unlockable, but we sadly couldn't check that out. And finally, the 5th weapon type is Yasuke's Teppo rifle, which again is quite powerful and definitely not as silent as the bow, and this weapon too comes with 4 different types of projectiles that can be refilled at vendors. The standard bullets, the concussion bullets which will build up the day's affliction status upon the enemies, disorienting them, the steel bullets which are going to cause enemies to fall into the vulnerable state, and the shrapnel bullets which, like the serrated arrows, will build up the bleed status upon the various enemies. Each of these weapons can be visualized to appreciate all their details and will come with stats such as weapon DPS, posture DPS, ability damage, critical damage, adrenaline gain, and more, along with its unique perks, some of which can be engraved at the forge building of your hideout, and as far as I've seen, there are no doubles, so each weapon or equipment element you are going to get should be completely unique both in its visuals and in its stats and perks. Each character will also be able to select a primary weapon that is their main one and a secondary weapon that they can turn to by pressing the right D-pad, even though only Yasuke will be able to switch between primary and secondary mid-combo. Speaking of weapons, but also equipment in general, as you can see, loadouts will make a comeback, with the game also providing a visual preview of the items contained in each loadout for the player, which also include the selected primary and secondary weapon. And while we are on the topic, transmog or visual customization will also be part of the game, allowing to change the appearance of our weapons and equipment while keeping their original stats. Finally, while still staying on the topic of combat, according to one of the presentations we have participated in at Ubisoft Quebec, the game will feature 42 combat archetypes or enemy types. We have already known some of them through the combat articles, and we have seen some of our own in the game, so we can list a few. The generic outlaws, the standard Ashigaru soldiers, the ronin, the snipers or rifle users, who can also throw some sort of bombs, the brute enemies, the samurai, which will not be sensitive to the smoke bombs and might organize search parties to find us if they catch wind of us, the guardians, who are formidable foes that are conjured up once the provincial alarm for one of our main characters is sounded and now they are wanted in the whole province, and finally the samurai daisho, which are enemy types that can only be found in castles in a limited number that goes from 2 to 5 depending on the size of the castle, and killing all of them will allow to open a legendary chest inside the castle and obtain some of the best loot in the game, which is something that I was actually able to do in the test wearing my Templar outfit for some reason. So there were 5 samurai daisho to find in Himeji Castle in the Harima province, and their defeat led to open the legendary chest, which contained the so-called Defense Master Clothing armor along with a Health After Parry engraving. The beauty of the world in Assassin's Creed Shadows is another strength of the game, no questions asked. One of the elements, if not the element that shocked me the most during my hands-on time with the game is how crisp it looked, how realistic it felt, and most of all, I had a pretty much bugless experience with no crashes, no freezes, nothing that would hamper my experience apart from some very minor visual issues. I may be biased because I really love Japan and its culture, and I have been waiting for an Assassin's Creed game set in feudal Japan for as long as I can remember, but from the rural areas to the most high-status backgrounds, it is a stunning setting and a huge one too. Just see for yourself, look at the map. So if the world is as detailed and as curated as it was in the Harima region that we tested, I feel like there's going to be a lot on the table for fans to enjoy. And this world is made even more realistic by the new system that were introduced with the game, namely the season system, the dynamic weather, and the lighting system that we already discussed in the stealth section, all affecting gameplay in multiple ways. For example, the dynamic season system. Shadows will offer the whole 4 seasons that will alternate each other organically as we play, with dialogues in cutscenes and especially fast traveling, fast-tracking the flow of the seasons themselves. To be more specific, the game will technically feature 8 seasons, as in each season will be made up of 2 states or 2 steps to show some degree of changes even within the same season. Now, we weren't able to see all different seasons and states in our test, but we did see some glimpses of different seasons and their changes through the various presentations we witnessed in our trip to Ubisoft Quebec, including winter with no bushes to hide, frozen ponds, different layouts of the enemies, and so on. In case you wondered, there is a way to see at which point of the current season cycle we are, and that can be found at the top right of the map screen, where this circle is indicated we are halfway through the spring cycle, with spring being indicated by this flower illustration. So this shot comes from the start of my open world playthrough, and it took me roughly 2 hours of general gameplay that included dialogues and fast travels to get to the end of the season, plus an additional fast travel that triggered a cutscene to signal the change of the season, and after that we were in summer, indicated by the sun illustration at the top right hand of the map. So by calculation, this shows, at least following my playstyle, that a season roughly lasts for 4 hours of general gameplay, even though I could have triggered the change of the season a bit before its end by using my scouts. As for what concerns the dynamic weather system, this is one of the systems I enjoyed the most, as it does make the world more realistic. In the game, the weather can shift gradually through 19 different states, as mentioned to us by art director Thierry Dansereau, from sunny to cloudy to rainy and snowy, up until the worst conditions that involve snowstorms that bring a very reduced visibility and thunderstorms. And speaking of storms, these don't happen randomly. They first are pre-announced by the wind picking up, the sky filling up with clouds until the rain starts pouring in, which is something that I really enjoyed. All these weather conditions are made even more realistic by the wind that picks up as the weather condition might be changing, and that is represented by dust, grass, leaves, and other particles moving to such an extent that it can bring to some wow moments, especially if you are playing with a proper audio system or headset, because then you'll be able to hear smaller details like indeed the sound of the trees being moved by the wind, or the sound of the rain being muffled where we are indoor, and it's details like that that make the game so realistic. But of course, it's not just a pretty world to look at or to play in, it's also a world that is quite satisfying to be explored, and as you might already know, Ubisoft has come up with some changes and additions to the exploration loop with Shadows that are aimed at pushing the player to find their own way in the world, to find the information they need or the location they need without necessarily guiding them directly, only through quest markers. In essence, this philosophy translates to a series of mechanics and features that are at the core of the exploration in Shadows. First of all, the observe mechanic, that allows you to scan all the interesting elements around you. Like I mentioned, this applies to the stealth sessions by tagging enemies and targets, but it also helps to highlight chests in the area and other opportunities too, side quest givers included, and this is just at a micro level, because at a macro level, as this time around we are lacking a drone-like eagle, observe will make us the eagle, as it can be used when at the top of a viewpoint to scan the various known and unknown locations around us and put them in the map. Side note on viewpoints, it appears that currently the classic eagle point of view with the camera turnaround activates only once and automatically when you get to the top of the viewpoint and can't be triggered anymore afterwards. I hope that can change soon. I know the AC fans really enjoy their synchronization camera. So that's what concerns exploration in general when we're not tracking a specific objective, but when we do have an objective in mind, then the exploration philosophy translates to the combo of the new quest board and the scout system. The new quest board really seems to be an evolution of what we saw in Assassin's Creed Mirage, where all your targets, all the quest givers, all your tasks are organized in groups, each with their current status, rewards, and clues as to how to move forward with their connected story. From here we can track our quests, and like in Odyssey we are going to get hints as to where to find our next objectives, and if we move to the map, which oftentimes highlights by itself the newly found objectives, by triangulating the hints at our disposal we can have an idea of where we are supposed to go next, and that's where we'll be able to deploy our scouts, the member of our spy network that, if our intuition was correct, will pinpoint our next objective. Then again, if you run out of scouts, we won't have to necessarily wander around aimlessly. What I found by playing the game is that if you have already found the question mark locations around a specific area, the hints will be usually referring to one of said locations, and even if you haven't scouted all the question mark locations and you don't have any scouts, you can be your own scout by getting to the hinted area and using the observe mechanic to find your objective. All this to say that the mechanics aimed at putting the player at the center of the exploration and investigation in the game do seem to work, but if you're not into this kind of loop, fret not, as a guided mode will still be in the game for you to always know where your next objective is. Going back to the scouts, this will be a finite resource and the game will do its best to get you to make choices as to how to use them. In fact, scouts will not only be useful in finding our next objective marker, though the more you deploy, the bigger the searching radius will be. In fact, we'll also be able to deploy some of them to smuggle some stockpiles we might find in the world for the duration of a season in order to obtain resources needed to upgrade our hideout, and we'll also be able to use them to cancel the provincial alert that may have been issued in an entire province after one of our dual protagonists has caused some high-profile illegal actions, and like I said, scouts can also be used to change the season when its cycle is almost over. So you can see how important it will be to choose carefully how to deploy our scouts, considering they will come back at the end of the season unless you pay some in-game currency at your hideout or at Kakuregas to instantly refill them. More specifically, Kakuregas are safe houses and fast travel locations scattered across the world that need to be unlocked through in-game currency and act as extensions of our main hideout. In these safe houses, we will be able to indeed perform some of the same actions that we can do at our hideout, but without going back to it, such as finding new opportunities like the locations of new vendors and castles, accepting contracts to obtain loot and resources for our hideout that are going to refresh every season. Sadly, I couldn't test these contracts and opportunities because they were out of the build's bounds, but there's more that you can do in Kakuregas, such as accessing the storage chest that is a storage for the items that you currently don't want to keep with you or that you might want to go back to at a future time, replenishing your supplies and stealth tools, and especially your scouts, which will be fundamental, and also managing your allies that can come to your aid while out in the world, but that we'll discuss along with the hideout in a dedicated video. So yes, the team seems to have put a lot of effort on orienting exploration towards a certain direction and philosophy with systems and mechanics that hold each other up to allow the player to discover things in the world at the pace that they like, but after playing the open world for a few hours, it also became apparent that something didn't add up. That other creators that were at the studio also agreed upon, and that is that the great majority of the exploration loop does feel designed mostly to be played as Naoe. Not that you can necessarily do it as Yasuke, but it does feel like a good chunk of these systems and a good chunk of the side activities that can be found in the world that aren't character specific, we'll have a lot to discuss about those in the future too, all those make more sense to be played as Naoe. Just to give you a few examples, in this game a good number of viewpoints can also be reached by Yasuke by using his own version of parkour and the internal stairs of buildings, but why would a player use so much time to do that? Crouching to not be spotted by the animals in order to perform the sumie paintings is easier done as Naoe than Yasuke, and in general, exploring, running around, looking for secrets, it feels more suited for her agility and speed, which also allows for access to areas that Yasuke cannot reach. So as much as this might feel like a non-problem for all the players who are going to play more as Naoe, based on my experience with the game, I feel that the exploration loop and the world design seem to clash a bit with the concept of the dual protagonist and might get the Yasuke players to feel a little left out in this specific regard. So, with all that said, for what concerns the aspects that we discussed today, bear in mind that Assassin's Creed Shadows passes the test pretty much with flying colors, still with a few doubts here and there to clarify once the full game is going to be released, but definitely a beautiful world to get lost in, with its main systems placed at the core of the experience in a very involving and fun way. So if the whole game proves to be like what we tested, and I'm pretty sure that the devs have kept some surprises for the full release, I do believe that it can have what it takes to be the success that Ubisoft desperately needs to obtain these days. But of course, these are only some of the main aspects of the game. There is way more to discuss about Assassin's Creed Shadows, and there are elements that could make or break the game that we couldn't fit in this video, like its story, the progression system including the hideout, the inner workings of the Animus Hub and its modern day story, and way more. All aspects that we are going to discuss in the coming days. And that's definitely not all. So keep your eyes out on all of our social media in the coming days. We have a lot more coming your way. But while you're waiting for that, you can definitely check out the recently released story trailer that is going to prepare you even more to delve in the narrative and the characters of the game. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in our next video.